Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. So this is the first video of just like me talking. I apologize in advance, I don't make a lot of those. I'm not sure how it's gonna go, but it's a subject that's very dear to my heart. So I just wanna like open up and talk about this because I think it's something that really changed my life completely. And I want like to be able to share my experience so that other people feel inspired and they can connect to this subject, hopefully can exchange thoughts on the comments as well. I love to hear from you guys. Before I start, I just want a little disclaimer actually. I'm a little sick, so I'm not sure how this is gonna go. I'm doing my best to keep my YouTube going and growing, actually. So yeah, thanks if anyone's watching this for supporting. So let's just dive in. So today I'm going to talk about like the power of creativity and how to use it on a daily life. So I think the word power is really important for me to describe creativity because it's the word that makes the most sense on how creativity has changed my life, or like thinking about creativity and like fostering that side of me. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to say before we dive in to everything is this idea that I want for people to break free of. Because people usually think that being a creative person is about doing something in like a creative profession. Like you are a creative person if you are an artist or if you are a designer or something like that. And that's totally not true. I think every human being, no, I don't think, that's actually a fact. That every human being is a creative person. Everyone is a creative being. We all do creative things. It's not just people who make art. They are creative. We are creative on a day-to-day about how we solve our problems. And one quick example that I can talk about is like maybe if you're cooking yourself dinner, you are creatively putting together ingredients with what you have. So you have the limitations at your house, your fridge, the food items that you have, and also something that you like to eat, how you like to put ingredients together, your experience with cooking, all that plays into this creative process. And I'm gonna go even further ahead and make these points that like even if you are like a doctor, it's a creative profession. Because how you go about solving someone's health situation, that can go many ways. So you do have to use your creative thinking a lot of the time. And even like in communication, when you communicate with people, you have to use your creativity a lot. So why not do that a little more consciously? And also, I'm going to talk about a little bit about why I think it's important to do that consciously. Okay, so there's this Albert Einstein quote that goes like this: creativity is intelligence having fun. And I really like this quote because it just talks about like using logic in a cool way. And yeah, that makes sense with creativity because I think logic is like the constraint we create to understand reality. So we create those rules, but it's important to understand that we as creative human beings, we don't play by those rules. We are often illogical. So it's really hard to predict how a human being is going to behave. So it's really interesting that we create like the logic is how we understand things, how we understand reality, and we have to like create those rules, but we don't play by them most of the time. We don't play by logic. We are highly like illogical in a lot of things, especially like when we are emotional. So I think creativity is just about being human at the end of the day, and I really like that. How's our brain on creativity? And a quick disclaimer, I'm not like a neuroscientist or someone in that field, so the way that I talk about things, they are like way oversimplified. And it's not like a research or a fact. It's just something I picked up because I really like the subject. So sometimes I listen to podcasts and a lot of different things from people who know a lot about this. So yeah, let's dive in. Well, so our brain acts on the linear implementation mode and also on the discovery mode. So we have those two ways that our brain can operate when we are like doing any activity. Essentially also when we are creating. So we have those two ways of operating. that's really interesting because if you know that, you know kind of like how to facilitate those two ways to go about doing things. So we have the linear implementation mode, as I was saying, and the linear implementation mode is the one that's facilitated by being super focused. You are really focused on a task, and you are like, you know, when you have like a repetitive task that you have to get it right. So being focused, like canceling outside distraction and being super like, I wouldn't say stressed, but like being really active on the task is going to facilitate that. And we also have the discovery mode, which is kind of like operating the opposite way, where you are facilitated by being super relaxed and causing unpredictability. So when we are experimenting, let's say I'm a designer, so when I'm experimenting with ideas, it's the discovery mode, right? Testing this, testing that. And those two different ways of operating are both super important in the creative process. So another way that I'm going to explain the creative process is with this idea of being in a collective group and also being like a singular individual. So essentially we have the collective, and that's where we share experiences together. But we as a single human being, the way that we internalize those experiences vary from human to human. But essentially everything goes through our senses first, and then if it gets filtered through our perception. So we don't perceive everything that our senses pick up, of course. It would spend a lot of energy if we did. So it does go through various types of filter. We have perception, we have memory. Not everything gets stored in our body. And from memory, we have different associations. And I think this mechanism is the most important one for like creativity. It's the association, like how we put things together to add meaning. So we have a mood board just for the atmosphere of the brand. This is the mood board.
Oh.
Yeah. Some things that we can associate the brand with and why. A wild garden, unscripted song, the shoreline, constellations in a woven breeze. Pretty much what you see in the mood board. Let's see. And once we put those things together and we start to materialize conversations, materialize anything, we start to bring back into the culture. So we start to bring back into the collective. So I would even go as far to say that creativity is how we contribute back to society in a way, how we keep growing as a collective. So that's really interesting. So there's this quote, a very famous quote from Steve Jobs that says that you can't connect the dots. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. So you have to trust while you're in that process, of course, that the dots will somehow connect in the future. So that's a really interesting take. I really like this take because to me that explains basically the creative process as well. Because when you are creating, you don't know like what you're gonna find out, how things are gonna work out, and how it's gonna materialize in the end. When I say materialize, it can even be like a conversation, like how you are talking and putting those things together. You don't know, like oftentimes in the creative process, you have to trust. And that having to trust is really interesting aspect. And also like the association mechanism that I was just saying, which is kind of like connecting the dots, right? That's like the association. And we can only build from what we already have internalized. And so we have, essentially, we as human beings, we have a lot of dots waiting to be connected. We have so much potential to create, and I think that's really, really amazing. Let me give you examples of like how human beings are so different in the way of how we create those associations. For instance, if I was in a room and I asked everyone to draw a dog, like, hey guys, let's draw a dog as a quick exercise. I did something kind of similar in my college days, and I could tell you like each person is going to draw a totally different dog. And I think that's so interesting because it shows like the potential that we have to form unique connections as human beings. So it's really interesting how we do that. And another point that I wanted to make is that we are born with a built-up drive to create. As children, we get in touch with that a little more, and then as we start to grow, people start to like teach us some limitations so that we can fit in society, which is great, but it can be like a double-edged sword, which is kind of like blocking our creativity and blocking like those ways in which we have to form unique connections as well. So A quick example for this is like when we are a child and we are drawing on the wall, parents can come in and start to teach us some rules, and then little by little we start to like diminish our creative side. And it can be hard as a grown-up to get back in touch with that. So another thing that I think is really important to talk about in creativity is the flow state. So the flow state is when an individual is like fully focused on the task that the person is performing. Research shows that like when you are in a flow state, you're like in a deep immersion state where you are fully focused and fully motivated in the intrinsic task at hand. I'm not like a flow expert. I know a lot of people talked about this concept before. It's very well known by now. But I think the flow goes hand in hand with creativity. And that just brings me to my next point, like finding yourself through creativity. When you are in that flow state, when you are fully focused and you are like tapping into your creative being and the most like deep immersion that you can get, it's therapeutic, let me tell you. And the reason why I think that is because when you are creating something very intentionally, you are developing that relationship you have with yourself. Because often what comes up as creative blocks can be insecurities that you have when you are stressed, when you need a break, things that just go on in your life and you may not like tend to those things on a day-to-day. But when you are deep immersed in a creative process, you kind of have to start developing that relationship with yourself along the way. You have to trust that you find the path, otherwise it creates blocks. Your relationship with yourself is very important. A lot can come that you don't realize, that's for sure. And it can often feel like a battle with yourself. And I know artists, like musicians, know that a lot because sometimes they create songs out of like emotional pain. But this goes like for everything you do creatively. You have to like tend to those needs of the mind, whether it's like to relieve stress, to process trauma, anything like that. You have to start to understand yourself a little more. And I think that's really good about the creative process. You need to know yourself very well. So with that being said, I haven't talked about like why I think creativity is powerful. I think that word is important in the realizations that I came throughout my life and throughout like this interest that I have in creativity. I think creativity is powerful, specifically. And let me tell you why. I know there are like different types of power. I've heard of that. Physical, economic, structural, institutional, discursive, expert. There's a lot of like different types of power. Usually when people talk about power, they talk about hierarchy between individuals. And when I started to like really focus on my creativity and try to develop that, I realized that the power that I get from creativity is within myself. It's not necessarily like in relation to others. It's really weird actually. Because I think creativity is like the power that you get to access within yourself. It's more about giving back to people, like creating and giving back to the world, than it's about taking, which I think is really interesting. But I think once you tap into your creative power, like you feel like you're on top of the world. You can do anything, you know? When you start to remove those limitations, when you start to tend to your emotional needs, stress, and all of that, you start to feel more and more capable and powerful. And I think that's awesome. So before I move forward, I'm gonna like share a quick backstory of who I am and how I came to that realization of how creativity can change my life. So I went from being curious to feeling powerful and then feeling fulfilled. And that change in my life happened like 6 years ago or something like that. At some point, I realized that I could learn anything that I wanted to learn. It started with yoga because before that, I wanted to do a lot of things, but I didn't have like the courage to start learning something. But I always wanted to do so many things, test out different hobbies and tap into my creativity, but I always like block myself, as most people do. But the limitations, they were all in my head. So eventually like something clicked. And I started to do yoga a little bit, like 10 minutes in the morning. Just 10 minutes every day, it's not hard. And then that gave me the power. I started to feel like a little more powerful with that habit. And then I went into surfing, and then I went into dancing, which is something that I always wanted to get back to. And I was like sedentary, I didn't do much exercise at all. But just because I started to feel more and more capable, more and more powerful, I started to not care so much if I did mistakes along the way. What I did at the time, I remember, is I challenged myself also. I just thought like, you know what? Let me try those things that I always want to do for like 5 years and see how good I can get. If after 5 years, I want to stop, it's fine. But I'm just curious to see what would happen if I kept those habits up for 5 years. And to be very honest, it's been more than 5 and I don't really care about the 5-year mark anymore. But at the start, it was a good motivation. I forgot all about that. But that was just like me feeling more and more powerful with like my power to create, whether it was habits, whether it was learning something. So what I came to realize is I always had those inclinations toward movement. For me, it was always about movement. And with my story, it kind of makes sense because I have ADHD and my body just works better if I move a lot. I think every person has their own like motivations, their own like inclination towards what they need to do, but they block themselves. And when you start like tapping into your creativity, you start to remove those blocks and you become so much more powerful. And that's what I wanted to say today. I realized that I could build my own lifestyle, like my life was its own creative process. And that was when the true power like came in for me. I could live a truly like fulfilling life. And for me, a fulfilling life has to be full of experimentation. Not sure how it is for other people, but that's what I realized for me. Before I close this up, I'm just gonna finish with like some lessons that I've learned from like obsessing over creativity and observing how creativity usually goes and how it can be a healthy process. So I'm just gonna tap into a couple of lessons. Lesson number 1, okay? Some ideas don't work and it's fine. You know, that's just part of the creative process. You get a little bit expectations when you like start to brainstorm some ideas, but when you start to materialize things, some ideas are not gonna work. It's fine, it's part of the process. Don't get too attached. You have to be open in your creative process. So lesson number 2, some ideas also work way better than you thought. So it can go both ways. Be open to like ideas, even like ones that you like, sometimes they are the best ideas when you start to test. So it can go both ways. You have to remain open. I think that's a really important part. Lesson number 3, start simple, start curious. I think the best way to start with something is simple and curious. Small steps, very open to what's gonna happen. Not like a lot of expectations. I think that's the perfect way. Number 4, deconstruct the idea that learning should be forced and learning should be painful. No, I think learning can be fun, can be simple, and it should just be consistent, basically. Every day is not gonna be the same, that's okay. Be open to that, you know. Number 5, capture your ideas before they are gone. That's a good one. It helps to keep you creative and motivated when you start to write down ideas and you have a notepad that you can pull, and you can get into that experimentation mode a whole lot easier on a day-to-day. That's really important. Number 6, record or track your process. This is really key because you're going to start to understand a little bit more about yourself, what you prefer, how you prefer to do things, and also keeping track just shows progress later. And that's really cool to see. It's a good motivation. So number 7, share process to passionate people. I think when you share your process with people who are just as passionate about something as you, it just helps to motivate you and the person, and also to create things together. That collaboration is a big part if you're open to that. Number 8, get comfortable with breaking the rules a little bit. Not everything has to be boxed in. Sometimes you have to try a little bit, something different. Even though like someone is gonna say, oh, you have to do it this way, challenge those things a little bit. You might find that you really didn't have to do that way. Be open, basically. Number 9 and final, to address, not avoid, very important there. To address blocks, be gentle and tend to your needs. You are a human being. You might need some rest. You might need to come back another day. You might need more research. Yeah, be gentle with yourself. So those were the lessons that I had. Before I end this video, I just wanted to suggest some content recommendations if you want to dive deeper into this topic. The first one, the book Alchemy, The Dark Art and Curious Science of Creating Magic in Brands, Business, and Life. This is perfect if you're also into branding, if you're into like the same subjects as me. This book is really cool. The Artist Way is a very famous book, and it also taps into creativity. And also another recommendation that I have is a podcast by Huberman Lab. This one is about accessing your creativity, and it's with Rick Rubin, and it's a really good one. It really inspired me, and it also has some neuroscience facts to back that up. So really cool. And wow, this was all. I talked a lot. I need some rest now. So I can get a little better. Anyway, thank you guys so much if you stick for the end. Thank you so much. This was such an important topic for me. I really wanted to make this video, but I was a little unsure about doing a video like this. It's my first test. Very open to the results. So yeah, see you guys later. If you want to like, comment anything, subscribe to the channel if you like that, and I'll see you guys on the next ride. Bye!